From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. And in today's lineup, K-State's Gregg Hanzlicek talking about cow herd health management heading into the spring calving season. Among several things, Gregg will emphasize the cow or heifer's need for adequate levels of vitamins A and E ahead of calving, and he'll look at steps to take in reducing the chances for scours disease problems at calving time. Also, K-State's Lucas Haig returns today to talk about a new report out of K-State on field pea variety performance. Based on 4 years of K-State field trials, he'll outline how field peas can substitute for the fallow part of a dryland crop rotation. And later on, with Stop, Look, and Listen, K-State's Gus Vander Hoeven, here on Agriculture Today. Agricultural producers, landowners, and creditors, you have a partner in your legal and financial needs. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services offers reliable, trusted information and guidance. Whether you need advice for ag credit concerns or are transitioning your operation to the next owner, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services can assist you in making sound decisions for your business. To learn more, call 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Cow-calf producers, if you're calving here in the springtime, you're readying for that critical season, hopefully, right now. We've brought by once again Gregg Hanzlicek to talk bovine health management. Gregg, as you know, is the production animal field investigations unit director for the Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory here at Kansas State University. Making sure a healthy calf is the end result of the calving season is the goal, and there are several facets to this, Gregg, right?
There are, certainly, and I know producers are probably tired of us because I come in here every spring, late winter, and talk about it, but there are just some basics that we need to refresh everybody's memory on to make sure that we have the most successful calf crop we absolutely can.
And we are going to throw in a few extra new wrinkles here as we discuss this topic, but it starts with the condition of that bred female, the cow, and whether or not she's up to the task and where do they need to be in that respect.
Well, we would like those on a scale of 1 to 9 for those cows and heifers to be 5, 6s, and some people don't even mind 7s. But we know that cows and heifers in the proper condition, they calve easier, they have more colostrum, they have higher quality colostrum, and their breed back is so much better than animals that are thin. Mm-hmm.
And you're advocating a balanced ration to get to that point.
Absolutely. I firmly believe that because winter feed costs are such a large percentage of their expenses that it just makes sense to have the forages tested and then have an appropriate diet that's going to minimize the cost but maximize what they're going to get out of their forages to make sure that their cows and heifers are in good condition at calving.
And it's very much a barnyard recommendation in a literal sense, but you suggest that producers use a very simple step to get an idea if that cow's nutrition is where it needs to be.
Yeah, and I get laughed about this, but I firmly believe that veterinarians and producers should be manure connoisseurs. And the cows never lie. You can tell a lot of what's going on in the diet of the cow and a cow-calf operation by looking at the manure. And this time of year, if producers are noticing that the manure is stacking up, meaning it's not making that normal 2 to 3 inch high patty, that's a really good indication that the protein level in the diet is not where it should be. The only really other thing that could be contributing to that is if there's a lack of water. Those are the two things that cause what we would consider to be stiff manure.
Lack of water, let's visit about that for just a moment. And that's become somewhat of an issue in our dryness recently around Kansas if one is using surface water, pond water. But water availability is one of those things that is easily overlooked in as far as calving success.
Absolutely. I think everybody knows that these cows need a large amount of water when it's hot. But I think what we fail to educate a lot of people about is that even in the winter, these cows need at least a gallon for every 100 pounds of body weight per day. So if we're talking about a normal 1,400-pound cow, she needs at least 14 gallons of water to drink a day.
That's quite a bit of water when it adds up. So you're going to have to somehow provide a clean and a healthful source of water.
Absolutely. And I mentioned before we went on the air that we had a case just recently where a producer had to haul water to his cows, and he made the mistake of putting the water into a container that actually had carried fertilizer, and we had some toxicity issues going there. So you're mentioning clean, good water is really, really key.
That could be a harsh result. Once more, water availability, assuring that the protein level is where it needs to be. There are a couple of other critical elements, though, vitamins in particular, that easily can be overlooked likewise.
Absolutely, and the ones we talk about the most are vitamin A and vitamin E. And unfortunately, it's just been in the news over the last week or so, is that the supply of vitamin A and E that we can put in a mineral for cows is on a worldwide short supply due to some things that are occurring in China and in Europe. And so we're expecting the price of minerals to probably increase substantially over the next few months because these products are going to be very, very expensive.
So they might be pricey, but these vitamins are needed and sorely in terms of, again, assuring a healthy calf. Why so?
Absolutely. And vitamin E, there's been lots of research to show that vitamin E is so important to the immune system of the cow and the calf, but a lot of good research has shown that cows on a high plane of vitamin A in their diet, they have fewer mastitis problems. They have fewer retained placentas. There's good studies that have shown actually their reproduction is even better. So vitamin E is one of those vitamins that's really, really important to these cows.
So regardless of the fact that the going rate for vitamin A and E has gone up, this is an investment that producers should not skip, you're saying, Greg.
Absolutely. And if we move over to vitamin A in the diagnostic lab at the vet school at Kansas State University, we diagnose vitamin A deficiencies in herds through complaints about stillborn or weak calves. And I went back and looked at the records over the weekend, and in the last 5 years, we've investigated 5 to 20 different cow-calf operations with vitamin A deficiencies that showed up as stillborn or weak calves. And so that's another vitamin that's very, very important if we want to make sure that we have healthy, viable calves at birth.
It's way too common, is what you're saying. So.
It's way too common, and it can come from different things. One of the things that happens is vitamin A content of forages disappears in time. And so if we're feeding several years past forages that we harvested, the vitamin A content is not going to be there when we harvested it. And then the other thing is that producers that buy mineral in large amounts on a discount, through time that vitamin A is going to oxidize, and that vitamin A content of that mineral is not going to be what it is today, what it was when they purchased it. So the reason I want to bring it up is I can understand how producers might want to reduce or eliminate their mineral packages from the cows in the next couple months because of the expense, but it's very important that they do not do that.
So we've looked at the nutrition plane of the cow or heifer. We've talked about making sure that ration is appropriately balanced, where water is a necessity in ample amounts and quality, and the vitamin needs as well. One of the main things that always comes up every year when calving season begins is the potential for scours disease in those newborn calves. And there are several things that can be done, Greg, to at least take a stab at preventing it.
Absolutely. And scours still remains our number one disease we fight in calves that are born alive. And everybody's probably going to have scours. We're never, ever going to prevent it. But there's a couple things that we can do, very key things that we can do to minimize our scour issues. And number one, blah, 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 we talk about all the time, is calve on as clean a ground as possible. And producers are well aware of the sand hills calving system. They can use that. The other thing that works very, very well for ranchers and cow-calf operators is to pair those cows and calves that have calved out of the calving area as soon as they can, daily, every other day. And what that does, that prevents the manure from building up. And so those calves that are going to be born in the next few days are not going to be too exposed to as high a pathogen load. So calving on as clean ground as possible. And then number two, make sure that every calf is up and nursing within that 2 to 6 hours after birth. That's really important.
And what we're looking at in that latter case is the need for an appropriate colostrum intake, and that's paramount to calf health.
Absolutely. And when we say colostrum, we're basically talking about the first milk that's available to the calf after birth. And we talk about how it's got the antibodies in it. A calf's born without any antibodies circulating in their system, so it's important that they consume that. But the things we don't talk about too much is that colostrum is really high in protein, and it's really high in fat as an energy source, and then it's very high in vitamin A also. So it's not only for antibodies, but it's a good ingredient for that calf's diet.
It's preferred, of course, that the calf is up and suckling right away and drawing that colostrum. If one has to intervene and supplement, you want them to be picky about the colostrum product they're going to use there.
Absolutely. I mean, sometimes we might have a heifer that calves and she doesn't have colostrum, or maybe she doesn't want to let the calf nurse, but there are some commercial powdered products out there that are very good. There's two types. There's replacers and supplements, and it's really important that producers pick the replacer because it has the minimal amount of antibodies in to protect that calf, which the supplements don't. So I highly recommend that producers have a bag or two of those products on their place. Then they mix them with water and make sure that calf gets some of that colostrum within that first 2 to 6 hours.
Well, Greg, you take all of this collectively, and this really puts the onus on a producer's calving time management. And that means thinking a great deal of this through well before that first calf drops, correct?
Absolutely. And I know some producers are already calving, but being prepared, having those electrolyte solutions on hand, having that colostrum on hand, making sure that our calving area is clean, making sure that we have the veterinarian's telephone number handy, either on our mobile phone or somewhere on the barn wall or wherever, and just have our dystocia equipment and all that cleaned up and ready to go. Will sure help to have a more successful calving season.
Timely guidelines right here. Thank you, as always, for coming over.
Thank you.
He's Gregg Hanzlicek from the Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory at Kansas State University. Again, an assortment of things for you cow-calf producers to keep well in mind as you approach the bulk of your spring calving activity here in the weeks ahead. You're listening to Agriculture Today, more shortly on the K-State Radio Network.
Agriculture and food systems are the main drivers of the Kansas economy, but must be improved in order to feed the world's growing population. How are we going to do so? Reduce food loss, find ways to preserve grasslands, and help families stretch their dollars. Global food systems is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing. To learn more, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today. Now we're going to visit, for the first time here on the broadcast, about crop performance research that's been conducted by Kansas State University, examining a crop that fits nicely into certain rotation systems, the field pea. And once again, we're talking with Lucas Haig. Lucas is the Research and Extension Crop and Soil Specialist for K-State based in Northwest Kansas. These performance trials have been going on for a few years now, and we'll get into the details here. What do you perceive, though, Lucas, as the producer interest in field peas and what they might do for a grower?
Sure, Eric. So there's really a couple of driving factors right now. Of course, number one is the economic situation we're in, and I think a lot of producers are looking for, is there some alternative crop out there that I can use to improve my economic situation? And I'll be the first to tell you, I think field peas fit a lot of needs in our cropping systems, but they're not a silver bullet. They're not a get-rich-quick scheme, and I encourage everyone to keep that in mind when considering any new alternative crop. But in general, though, it is an opportunity for us to reduce fallow or eliminate fallow out of our dryland rotations is how most guys here in northwest Kansas are using the field peas. And so we found ourselves in a situation here several years ago. We had a lot of producer interest. Producer interest was growing. There's a number of varieties out on the market, and being a relatively new growing area with a very unique climate, we didn't have the data that we felt we needed to make solid variety recommendations.
As you look at field peas then, again, producers, a number of them, anything but familiar with this crop, what conditions are they favored to produce in?
Yes, where they fit really nice for us time-wise and rotation-wise is, in our typical wheat sorghum fallow or wheat corn fallow rotation, these peas fit as a fallow replacement crop really nicely. So what we're talking about is a dry yellow spring field pea, and so they'll germinate at 40-degree soil temps. So basically, I tell our folks that if the calendar says March and you can do a nice job planting, it's time to go. So we plant early March and then typically harvest them late June, early July, about the same time as wheat. And so we can no-till those peas into last year's row crop stubble, get a crop off of them. They quit using water about mid-June, take the peas off, and then we got a real short fallow period in there and go back to wheat in the fall.
Are they rather thrifty in their moisture usage then?
They are, and that's what makes them fit that fallow replacement option quite well, is they're very shallow-rooted. They pretty much, make a crop off of the precipitation we receive, which, in the case of fallow, a lot of that water would have been lost to evaporation anyways. So we kind of live off that surface, 18 inches in the soil plus precip, and so we don't mind that profile water deeper down. So we find that our yield penalty on the subsequent wheat crop is really quite modest compared to some other fallow replacement options.
And as you're talking a fallow replacement here, does this as a green crop have advantages over, say, that previous stubble in as far as conservation?
Well, certainly there's a lot of talk today about soil quality and trying to keep a living root in the ground as often as or as much as possible, and so certainly it fills that in there. It also does something good for us in that it brings a broadleaf to what are otherwise, grass-only rotations, and so it brings some diversity of species into play as well. Maybe
some weed control opportunities likewise?
Yeah, we've got some good tools for weed control with these. We can typically go out with a product like Spartan or a generic Spartan pre-plant on the peas, and then if we get a good stand and good canopy, that combined with that residual herbicide, we can basically keep the kochia knocked out of them.
Mm-hmm. And that's highly important this day and age with our kochia troubles in particularly western Kansas. So let's get into the performance tests on field peas that K-State's been conducting. You say 4 years running now, Lucas.
Yes, we started in 2014 with just 3 locations in Rawlins County, Scott County, and Thomas County. What we've quickly learned in that first year, we also had a location in Garden City in 2014. Various times we've tried pushing these peas south, and we are finding there is a line at which going south doesn't make sense from a heat standpoint. And so I'm not terribly comfortable taking field peas south of K96 at this point in time, because we lost the Garden City trial in 14 as well as the Scott County trial, and several other times we've tried that. We started in 14, seen some really nice yields in Rawlins and Thomas counties. Only had 6 entries that first year, so not a big look, but it got us started.
Just as we're talking geographically for a moment here, how far east could you anticipate going with field peas then?
Yeah, so unfortunately, our trials have only went as far east as Gove and Decatur counties, but I do know producers have had success with them as far east as Russell County. So I think we're still filling that out a little bit. We're hoping to add a trial location this year, probably over in Rooks County. So we'll continue kind of testing, where's that eastern boundary.
And as far as familiarity with this crop, what sorts of yield targets typically are we talking of to consider a field pea yield acceptable?
Yeah, so typically, we're figuring a break-even yield's kind of, maybe around that 15 bushel mark. What we've seen in the trials is at the very top end, we've seen some yields knocking on that 60 bushel mark. That was in a limited irrigation trial we had over in Sherman County. But all in all, we're averaging right around 34 bushel peas when we look at the top group varieties. I think that's a pretty good number. Maybe, if someone was putting together a cash flow or a budget on them, I'd probably use something more conservative, maybe in the mid to high 20s.
And what you have in the way of data is indicating that there is a selection of varieties out there that can be competitive in regard to that yield target?
Yes, we're starting to see some varieties that have some stability over time. And as we get more and more varieties with more years in the trials, some of that will start to become a little more clear. But, we've got even got some 4-year averages in Rawlins and Thomas counties, and so we can look at things like early stars, a variety that's done well for us, and that's because, again, one of our biggest enemies of yield for us is heat at flowering time, and so some of these varieties that are a little shorter maturity tend to yield a little better for us. Admiral's another one that maybe isn't always topping the trial, but it's shown us a great deal of yield stability over the years, which I think is really important for guys to consider when you're thinking about adopting a new alternative crop is maybe we're not out to pick that racehorse right away, but finding a variety that will give us a stable production over time.
And just there you hinted at this, there are variations in season length to consider as one would look at field peas.
Yeah, there are, and that's one of we're not able to capture that at all of our locations, but always at the Colby location we're able to get good notes on flowering date, and so you can kind of see, what tends to be some of the earlier maturing varieties versus some of the later maturing.
So the data for the past 4 years has been summarized from those 3 locations, and producers, much as they would with the other crop performance tests that K-State posts, can study that data and figure out what field pea might work for them, if at all?
Yeah, so we've got a nice summary. People can look at either the individual site years data, or we've got some summary tables put together. We've added and subtracted locations over the years. As I said, we had 1 year of a limited irrigation trial in Sherman County, and then kind of our other long-running trial site now is in northern Decatur County. So it's a dry land location, and again, hoping next year to maybe add something over in the Rooks County area.
So where is the data available?
So it's available, there's a new publication out from K-State. If you go to the K-State bookstore and search for Field Pea Performance Test, folks can also find the results as well as our other field pea information. We've got some other trials involving seeding rates, seed treatments, and just overall production practices. And all of the K-State field pea information is online at the Northwest Area Agronomy website.
And you can get to that at northwest.ksu.edu/agronomy. So if a producer is enticed by the idea of trying field peas for the first time, what would, in closing here, Lucas, you suggest is 1 or 2 of the primary things that a producer look into and consider if they're going to take on field peas?
Yes, I think, trying to put together a market's important, and that's changed. Having on-farm storage really opens up the opportunities to how you market this crop. As of today, it's not really a crop you can deliver out of the field or at least to elevators nearby. And so, having a marketing plan in place, I think is an important piece of this. And again, we've got some nice resources in terms of general production, seeding rates, the importance of inoculation, herbicide programs, that sort of thing, and we've got all that on the website. And we've got some producers here in northwest Kansas that are approaching, we've got 8-9 years experience growing these, so we've all learned a lot together through this process.
But to, again, tap into the information that K-State has pulled together from the field tests as well as general agronomic guidelines for growing field peas, you can go to northwest.ksu.edu/agronomy, or you can go onto the K-State Research and Extension bookstore site and search for Field Pea Performance Test to see the yield data and associated information that's been gathered the last 4 years. It's a crop alternative that could well be a substitute for the fallow portion of a rotation in the High Plains region. So, Lucas, thanks for giving us an idea of what's out there. We appreciate your time.
You bet, Eric.
That from Lucas Haig, Crops and Soils Specialist, K-State Research and Extension, based in northwest Kansas, on the recent years now published of field pea variety performance. This is Agriculture Today, and we'll be back in a moment on the K-State Radio Network.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Agriculture Today continues now here on the K-State Radio Network. Once more, glad to have you aboard. Eric Atkinson here as we move on over to today's agricultural news page now and these headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. Leucadia National Corporation is exploring a sale of part or all of its stake in its National Beef Packing Company unit. People familiar with the matter reporting that Leucadia owns a 79% stake in the Kansas City-based beef giant. That's a 26-year-old supplier of steaks, burgers, other beef products, as you know. Leucadia purchased its national beef share back in 2011 for $868 million. Now, this process is at an early stage, and Leucadia may not opt to move forward, according to one individual. Leucadia is weighing the sale as profits grow for processors such as National Beef. National Beef slaughters about 12.5% of U.S. beef cattle. Beef exports last year climbing nearly 13%, according to the latest from the USDA, led by growing sales to Japan, Hong Kong, and Korea. Foreign sales of U.S. beef projected to climb another 4.5% here in 2018. Now, in 2016, National Beef swung to a $329 million profit after losing money in 2013, 14, and 15. Over the first 3 quarters of 2017, National Beef's profit jumped 61% to $310 million from the same period in the prior year. National Beef ranks as the 4th largest U.S. beef processor behind Tyson Foods, JBS SA, and Cargill. The Refreshed Beef campaign has reached millions of consumers since it was launched back in October. Todd Domer tells us here the message is being extended at the state level by beef councils, including the one right here in Kansas.
The Kansas and Missouri Beef Councils are among state checkoff organizations highlighting the Rethink the Ranch portion of the campaign, which features hard-working ranchers and feeders across the country. Nationally, the Rethink the Ranch anthem video and related video segments have generated more than 765,000 views to date and reached more than 3.5 million consumers. The series of videos capture the passion and commitment to animal care and the environment common among people who raise beef. The state councils will promote the producer videos in a YouTube campaign starting this month. This exposure will build on the successful national efforts. Rethink the Ranch is part of the BeefIt'sWhat'sForDinner.com website that was visited by more than 2 million people from October 3rd to December 18th. Some of the web traffic was driven to the Raising Beef section, where Rethink the Ranch producer profiles are found. Consumers visiting this section stayed on the website 42% longer compared to before the site was refashioned. Raising Beef is the second most viewed section on the site, trailing only the recipe collection, which has more than 800 different beef preparation ideas. Through the combined efforts of the state-national partnership, the checkoff is helping make the Beef It's What's for Dinner brand as broad, extensive, and cost-effective as possible. I'm Todd Domer.
Now, U.S. pork producers receive a positive return on their checkoff investment, according to a new study conducted and released by an agricultural economist out of Cornell University, Harry Kaiser. Additionally, 91% of pig producers who took part in the annual producer survey in November acknowledged their support of the pork checkoff, with a record low opposition of just 3%. This economic analysis of pork checkoff programs is commissioned every 5 years by the National Pork Board. The study quantifies the returns generated by the pork checkoff investments in research, pork promotion, and producer education programs. The latest results cover the years 2011 to 2016. It is important to producers who directly fund the pork checkoff to understand and quantify the value of their investments. Those are the words of the National Pork Board president and a producer from Nebraska, Terry O'Neill. He says these results indicate, in his words, a positive impact on all aspects of the pork checkoff, from conducting production-focused research to growing consumer and export demand for pork. Specifically, this study documented a growing return on investment through defined benefit-cost ratios across several key program areas from 11 to 16, including production research, each dollar invested in that to benefit on-farm practices, yielding $83 in producer value. Also, in regard to foreign market development, each dollar invested yielding $24 in producer benefits. The advertising and non-advertising promotion resulting in benefits of just over $14 for advertising, $12 for non-advertising promotion for each dollar invested. And the research to grow demand, market drivers returning $8.30 for each $1 invested. Lastly, says this study, the net result collectively, the overall return of checkoff program activities, $25.50 for each dollar invested. Now, again, it reported findings as well from that study that gauges producer support of the checkoff, the most recent survey conducted this past November, including 550 pork producers. It showed for the 8th consecutive year, producer support for the checkoff has improved, remaining at 91%, opposition declining to that record low of 3%. That is down from 4% back in 2016. And noting here that Kansas State University's Analytical Laboratory in the Department of Animal Sciences and Industry has now expanded its services. It can now analyze forage samples to give you producers a clearer picture of what your livestock are consuming. The lab has primarily been a meat science lab for analysis, but new lab manager Katie Hargrove says that the services have been expanded now to include mineral and fiber analysis and nitrate testing. It is located in Weber Hall here on the campus. Among the tests offered are moisture and dry matter content, crude protein, calculated total digestible nutrient analyses, and more. More information is available on the department's website, asi.k-state.edu, or you can contact Katie Hargrove at khargrove@ksu.edu, khargrove@ksu.edu, or 785-532-1276. Again, the number 785-532-1276. One last reminder for those of you intending to attend the Cover Your Acres Winter Conference next week. That would be Tuesday and Wednesday in Oberlin. This is the final day to get that break on the early bird registration, $40 if you register today, no later than today, for either of the days, $50 for both days. After today, $60 per day for registration. You can check that out at northwest.ksu.edu/coveryouracres. Again, northwest.ksu.edu/coveryouracres. We'll return shortly with more. This is Agriculture Today.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen. This is our state, Kansas.
When I came inside, my wife asked, "What were you doing outside?" I said, "I watched airplanes flying over high. They're vapor trails."
That's Gus Vanderhoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
This past weekend was not as nippy as the weekend before, and I needed to walk the farm, or at least parts of it. The last time I went, I had a flat in the far back corner of the farm. I could not get the jack to work, so I walked out. That in itself was a nice walk across the fences and the fields as the sun was setting behind the far hills. But now I had new tires, and I was not worried. I parked near the crossing which tends to wash out, but the crossing was still in good shape. The co-op truck had no problem getting onto the fields behind it to spread the fertilizer on the brome. That is done. Now we need some moisture to help set the fertilizer. We will wait patiently. I walked a few trails hoping to find a shed, a dropped antler. It's always a thrill to find one. It's still early, but I looked. I also looked where I found a beautiful one last year, hoping, as one never knows. I had followed a deer trail, going through the woods to the open gate. Years ago, while standing pressed against a tree trunk, I watched several does file by very close. They never noticed me as they quietly moved along. I followed the same old trail winding through the stand of trees. Freshly turned leaves, slightly darker color, indicated the narrow trail. From there, the walking trail goes uphill to the native grass meadow we cut for hay. The trail winds through a small and protective clearing. There's not much one can do with it. It's wooded, and I like to get a few more oaks growing there. The 2 acres are good habitats for wildlife. Turkeys, I know. Bobwhites hang around there as a covey exploded as I walked the trail. They must have huddled close together near a fallen tree stump, as that is where all of a sudden the prrr, prrr exploded from. They weaved their way in and among a dense growth of cedars, young cedars, which still provided shelter close to the ground. I was glad to see them. It was not a big covey, only 8 birds, but they were quail. Where snow was still laying, there were plenty of coyote tracks as well as deer prints. However, I did not find a dropped antler. I know that they will be there, as the deer and the bucks are around. Along the edges of the field I noticed 2 red hogs flying away as I stepped out. No water came out of the big spring. That is the spring of which I know that if I ever would cut down and remove all trees, oaks, cedars, walnuts and hackberries, as well as cottonwood and elm, along that steep side of the hill, the spring would start to flow again, even in the dry period. However, I will never cut the trees on that extended steep bank. Never. It's not because of the work. It would be a lot of work on that steep grade, but I like the wooded area with all that I know is in it. It is, for me, the clearest example of owning 400 plus acres of plain wheatland or owning the landscape with creeks, wooded edges, deep draws, woodlots, clear hills, and springs that our landscape is made up of. It's a great place to walk and get lost, hide or camp, for that matter. I know a wheat farmer would say, "Give me the clean, flat land." I still hold memories of maneuvering the combine down into and up across the creeks. It took some work and patience, and then drive the loaded wheat trucks in and out. Good memories from times we grew grain and beans. Now it's all brome. Both Bud and Dean have passed on, but I hold the memories and they're good. Bud stopping the swather when he was mowing alfalfa we grew to shoo away the covey of quail. He cared for the land and what was within it. As I finished my walk, I returned to the parked truck, backed out and slowly drove across the farm road, an old road, a very old road, following one branch of McIntyre Creek. I think it's the main branch, our farm and hills beyond, farming the watershed. To read a watershed is interesting, with its draws and gullies, bringing water down the hills. When I can get some help, I must clear some fallen trees. I'll cut them up into firewood to keep warm next winter, or I'll give it away. There's some good oak, as well as locust and walnut. There's some nice dead elm, all good wood. That reminds me, it was my grandson who asked a few months ago if I had any old crosscut saws. He knew darn well I had some hanging. He also knew I would never use them again. So he took a set home. He is young enough and strong enough to use them if ever chainsaws don't run anymore. These old crosscuts are fun to use if they are sharp. I'm glad that I can cut with a steel chainsaw, though. For that matter, any other make of a chainsaw. All they need to do is start. Cutting wood, building a brush pile, all is a good afternoon's work. Come to think of it, I think my grandson Matt owes me a good afternoon's work. Just the stories I will tell him should make it worth his time. But then he also walked away with 2 sets of saws. I just placed some more wood on a good fire indeed. I might go for another walk with the weather while it is so pleasant.
Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on rural Kansas. That's our time for today. We appreciate you being along with us, and please rejoin us this same time tomorrow. Until then, Eric Atkinson here. This has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.